Tiffany was an amazing daughter. I was so blessed to have had her for the short time that I did. She was a very talented vocalist and musician. She made it to the semifinal rounds of American Idol twice. Just beautiful heart, just would help anybody who needed help. She was the kind of person, if she saw anybody being picked on or the underdog, she was always the one that stuck up for them. She was the mother of 2 young children, 3 and 5 years old when she passed.
Virginia Krieger lost her daughter Tiffany to fentanyl poisoning. She's just one of tens of thousands of people who've lost loved ones due to the ongoing fentanyl crisis. For these folks, their lives are forever changed. I first met Krieger in her home in Ohio. She was surrounded by pictures of her daughter Tiffany. Her daughter's bright smile, blue eyes, long brown hair adorning the poster boards, a haunting reminder of a life taken way too soon. She was preparing to leave for an event in Washington, D.C. to protest the Chinese government at the embassy, to warn other parents about the deadly drugs pouring across the southern border. She was sad. A TV is on in the background and a cigarette in her hand.
Her loss wasn't just a loss to our family, but it was a loss to so many others who she has helped along the way, people who just loved her. And it was a shock. It was nothing we expected.
She was alone, but so many people in America are feeling the same pain. In fact, the Facebook group that Virginia helped found for families of the victims of our nation's drug epidemic has more than 19,000 members, and it's growing at an average rate of 300 new members per week. And more frighteningly, our adversaries, particularly China, are now poisoning Americans through counterfeit pills. That's what happened to Virginia's daughter and tens of thousands of other Americans. And yet, we hardly ever hear about it. We are living in a world of disinformation, one where major news stories are suppressed and the narratives surrounding mainstream media outlets are curated by big government, big media, and big tech. Welcome to Dark Wars, The Border. I'm Sara Carter. I've spent the majority of my career covering immigration and border issues for newspapers, television, and radio. In this episode, we'll explore the connections between China, the cartels, and drugs like fentanyl and methamphetamine pouring over the U.S. border from Mexico. We'll also show you how China uses the drug cartels as proxies in its irregular war against the United States. Together, they're weakening our families, destroying our communities, disabling our government, and crippling its ability to respond effectively to the pandemic of addiction. From rural America to our biggest cities, almost every family is affected by the tragedy of drug poisoning or addiction. Even our president's own family isn't exempt from the pain.
It's Dad. I called to tell you I love you. I love you more than the whole world, pal. I gotta get some help. I don't know.
It's a tragic story. President Biden obviously cares deeply for his son Hunter, but this is also one situation of many that could make the President of the United States an easy mark for Chinese influence.
No matter what you need, I love you.
It's called elite capture, when an adversary applies pressure to a powerful person's known weak spot. Peter Schweitzer of the Government Accountability Institute says that's precisely what China is doing to President Biden, and this puts our nation at risk.
The Chinese have a term for it. They call it elite capture. And the strategy is they want to effectively capture elites in other countries. They've done it in Australia and New Zealand. They're doing it in the United States. And they basically want to entice elites by giving them sweetheart deals, helping make them rich, because that's going to give them leverage over those elites. That's what you have with the Bidens.
Schweitzer's research exposed the tens of millions of dollars that were transferred from Chinese companies directly connected with the Communist Party into Hunter Biden's businesses and bank accounts.
Think about, and you've done a lot of great reporting on this in the past, the situation with the alleged meetings with the Russians in Trump Tower and all the Russia collusion stuff that was presented in the context of concerns about national security, the integrity of the first family, which all, of course, ended up not being true. In the case of the Bidens, you have the fact that Hunter Biden and the Biden family has received, by the account of the laptop and other material, some $31 million. I talk about this in my book. And if you look at the four businessmen mentioned in the emails that set those deals up, Sarah, each and every one of them has ties to the highest levels of Chinese intelligence, meaning one guy who helped arrange a $20 million deal for Hunter Biden at the exact same time he did that deal, was business partners with the vice minister for state security in China.
Hunter Biden isn't the only one. This is a common tactic of foreign intelligence to target senior government officials and their families. In 2018, it was revealed that California Senator Dianne Feinstein had a Chinese spy on her staff for 20 years. In 2020, Axios uncovered a story that a Chinese national named Fang Fang targeted local politicians in the Bay Area, and one of her biggest targets ended up being Congressman Eric Swalwell. Just this October, 2 Chinese nationals were charged with paying tens of thousands of dollars in cash and jewelry to obstruct a federal investigation into Chinese tech giant Huawei. Meanwhile, down on the porous border, Mexican cartels are taking advantage of our weakness by bringing in hundreds of billions of dollars in narcotics.
We've got numerous amounts of bundles through here. This is one that I guess we had missed or whatever, and like I said, about 2 years ago. And we've come through here and you can just see it. This was about 50 pounds, I guess, that was in here, and it's just now.
So that's marijuana just scattered there on the ground?
This is all marijuana right here. Yes, sir. All marijuana here.
This is one of many drug smuggling camps found along the border by law enforcement.
This is a layup spot right here if you want to peek in here. It looks like a decent bag right there. Still looks full. We bust them a lot in here, or they'll run from us in here, and then they leave their bags. Like this one right here, he left water, his Coke. See, so this wasn't too old. I mean, the tortillas are not even molded. So he was probably a runner. Left his tuna. And it's whole jug of water. There's tons of them all through here, tons. There's some more carpet there.
What you might not know is that China, our number one adversary on the international stage, and a country that has its sights set on replacing the United States as the global military and economic superpower, is partnering with the cartels to make those drugs more potent, dangerous, and deadly.
The cartels are making hundreds of millions of dollars.
Florida Congressman and retired Green Beret Michael Waltz has advised presidents on national security.
The Chinese are pumping this poison into our system, and it's all over the country. And this administration's not doing a damn thing about it.
He believes America should be on high alert as China corners certain strategic markets that are essential to our lives.
They've now gobbled up 90% of the global pharmaceuticals market. We no longer make penicillin in this country. We no longer make antibiotics. We no longer make oncology meds. So they've gobbled up our pharmaceuticals. They've gobbled up our mineral supplies. They are now gobbling up the food supplies.
The fact is, China is the backbone of the Mexican cartels. Overdose and drug poisoning deaths are piling up on American soil. We know who's responsible, and we're doing nothing about it.
We got to realize that fentanyl deaths in the United States are murders. China is murdering American citizens.
China expert, lawyer, and author of The Coming Collapse of China, Gordon Chang, explains how China is deeply involved in every aspect of the fentanyl crisis. He warns that if we don't take action now, we could eventually lose our way of life.
These fentanyl gangs that either make the drug itself or make the compounds, they are large, they're far-flung, they're international in scope, and in a near-total surveillance state, which China now operates. These gangs could not do anything without not only the knowledge of Beijing and the Communist Party, but also with their approval. And in many cases, we believe that the Communist Party cadres actually benefit financially from this. We also know, Sarah, that the state financial system in the state banks in China, they launder the proceeds of the fentanyl gangs. So this is the Chinese central government and the Communist Party are behind these fentanyl deaths. And we should be treating these as China's murders of American citizens.
Meanwhile, the families of poisoning victims are literally crying out in the hope that someone will do something to prevent the same sad story from happening to another family.
Here's the crazy part. So for COVID, within 30 days, everybody in this country knew 3 things. Wear a mask, social distance, wash your hands. Every day, we had a ticker on the TV all over, and they had how many cases there were, how many people died, how many people were in the hospital. We are 9 years into this fentanyl crisis, and we're only counting the dead. And we only get those numbers a year and a half after the fact. For a crisis that's evolving by the day. How many people have poisonings, fentanyl poisonings every day in this country who survive? Nobody knows. Yet we're trying to respond to a crisis when we don't even know how big it is. We don't know who it's affecting and how. And yet they keep trying to say they're addressing it, but they're not.
Virginia Krieger and families like hers are being devastated by the fentanyl poisoning and drug epidemic. Our inability to address this crisis early on left the door open for China and other adversaries to target our nation and ultimately use the weapon of narcotics against us.
China has compromised almost every aspect of American life.
Former Guatemalan intelligence chief Mario Duarte works closely with U.S. intelligence agencies. He's concerned that China's influence is not only spreading in Latin America, but right here at home.
Technology, telecommunications, the presidency, our medicine supply, now our land, even the minds of our young people. They have managed to get literally into the head of the United States. And they're controlling, I think, a lot of the power strings in our country, unfortunately. Good thing is that a lot of people are noticing it, and I'm hoping that more and more people from the Senate and Congress are going to start pushing our agencies to be more aggressive.
China and America are at war. This is not a traditional war on a battlefield, not yet. But it is irregular warfare, and it is being waged using economics and in the media. American institutions like the NBA and Hollywood studios regularly grovel before Beijing. Meanwhile, Americans are being lied to. Even our own House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, is downplaying China's intentions.
We still support the one China policy. We go there to acknowledge the status quo is what our policy is. There was nothing disruptive about that. It was only about saying China is one of the freest societies in the world.
Bill Gertz of the Washington Times says there's a deliberate strategy of lies out of Beijing to boost its ambitions and weaken the United States.
They've dropped all pretense in their current propaganda. They view the United States as the main enemy, and they're using increasingly sophisticated disinformation and propaganda operation to discredit the United States, to divide us internally against politically, racially, in every possible way that they can, because they know and they understand that their system can only survive. It's a communist system which is built on false principles. This whole notion that you can fix the problems in the world through ending capitalism and imposing socialism on everyone. And that's really the guiding principle there.
Retired CIA station chief Daniel Hoffman is frustrated by our government's refusal to be honest about the threats posed by China. He says it's a disservice to the American people and further endangers national security.
President Reagan, one of the greatest things he did was to tell all of us in very clear terms where we stood in our ideological fight against the Soviet Union and what that administration, his administration, was doing about it. We're not doing that right now. I'm not sure that Americans understand as well as they should just the ubiquitous nature of China's threats, how significant they are to our national security, and maybe most importantly, what we all need to be doing about it. And it might involve some sacrifice on the part of American citizens, which is why the president needs to address them.
Our failure to expose the truth and address the issues at the border that are allowing our enemies to fund proxy groups targeting our nation and its global interests puts our nation at great risk. Many of China's actions blindside us, from intellectual property theft to loaning our neighbors in Central America billions of dollars in an attempt to exert their influence worldwide. The United States' neglect of the region is leaving the door wide open for China to offer money, infrastructure, technical assistance, and other expertise to Latin American nations that are eager to solve some of the problems their people face. Former Guatemalan intelligence chief Mario Duarte warns that many times it's a setup.
When there's no investment from other countries, China comes in, offers these deals to the Latin American countries, obviously loaded with a lot of corruption. And what happens later on is exactly what happened, for instance, in Djibouti, where they got this port, and when the government wasn't able to pay the Chinese, they took over the port.
These actions are coming without a response from the United States. And it's leaving our Latin American allies, like Guatemalan President Alejandro Giammattei, wondering whether the United States leadership is primed for a comeback or gone forever. He spoke candidly about this on a visit I made to Guatemala City this summer.
Estados Unidos se olvidó.
For many years, the United States has forgotten about this part of the hemisphere, about Latin America. The result of forgetting is that others have taken over. China, Russia. They have been taking over China by building stadiums in exchange for isolating Taiwan, but they also put countries in debt to keep them in check. I am not one to send messages, but I think it's time for the United States to get its house in order if they want to reclaim the hegemony in the free world. If they don't get ready quickly, the free world as we know it, the world that we would like, the democratic world, the world of respect between nations, the world where the rulers respect the governed, the world of a free economy, we would be at the end of the road. It's important to understand that we must recover those principles that seem to have been forgotten.
President Giammattei's warning should strike fear into the hearts of Americans. If we stop helping our neighbors grow their economies, we are making ourselves more vulnerable to our enemies right here in our own hemisphere. They see that weakness as a weapon that can be used against us and our allies.
Nosotros, por ejemplo, en el caso de Guatemala, le hemos
For example, the case of Guatemala. We have talked repeatedly about turning Guatemala into a wall of prosperity where Guatemalans don't have to leave. What do we need? I told the delegation of congressmen that came last week. Instead of having a lot of factories in China, yarn factories, for example, or other places, if they would move them to this part of America, and the United States would give some tax breaks to those companies for moving their factories from China to Guatemala, for instance, we would be generating thousands of jobs. A person with a job makes no one of the family members want to leave because they have good jobs, are well paid, and they would be very pleased here. So the United States policy must change as well in terms of supporting its allies, and that there are a few of them left.
China is even trying to beat America to the punch when it comes to energy. And many of the investments we're making as a nation to expand green energy and end our reliance on foreign oil and gas are stabbing American workers in the back. China is quickly cornering the market on wind turbines and solar panels. Peter Schweitzer of the Government Accountability Institute says this leaves American manufacturers unable to compete in the global economy.
We did have, under Donald Trump, tariffs that would help American solar panel companies compete against the Chinese, who were, of course, being subsidized by their government. But guess what? Joe Biden got rid of those tariffs, got rid of those protections on the American solar industry. So what's literally going to happen is 80% of the economic benefit of the renewable energy component of this bill is going to end up benefiting China, because that's where the technology is going to be bought. And China is going to be the new OPEC when it comes to green energy.
Beyond the global economy, Bill Gertz says China's propaganda machine, its energy strategy, its Latin American meddling, and using the drug cartels as proxies against the United States are threatening our lives, freedom, and our culture.
We have to understand that we're facing a threat that's beyond just some kind of strategic competition, that it's an adversarial and enemy relationship. And I think if we can do that, then we can begin to pass legislation in a bipartisan fashion that would address some of these threats, whether it's the border, fentanyl, whether it's buying up land in the United States to use against us. Those are the kinds of things that we need to do first.
China is not our friend. It's doing a number of things to destabilize the United States. In addition to dividing us from our allies, it's now attacking our families and children. Derek Maltz is a former special agent in charge at the DEA. He believes the unholy alliance between Mexican cartels and China is dealing a death blow to our communities.
Cartels are the enemy of our children. They are basically taking advantage of the weak security at the border and the vulnerabilities. They are operating like a global terrorist organization. They're killing more Americans than any terrorist organization that I'm aware of in the history of this country. We're losing 9,000 Americans a month. Every 5 minutes, we're losing somebody. Families are waking up devastated every single day. Some kids as young as 13 years old, they go up to the room, the parent finds the kid blue, dead in the bedroom, because they don't know what they're taking.
Chinese President Xi Jinping publicly promised President Trump that his country would clamp down on the exporting of fentanyl. That's not what's happening. While the shipments of completed fentanyl pills decreased significantly, Maltz said the Chinese Communist Party is simply sending the ingredients for this deadly poison to the Mexican cartels.
The chemicals, the precursor chemicals, are coming out of Asia, predominantly China, right? China's producing these chemicals in their labs all over the place, and they have containers. They ship the containers to the ports in Mexico. The ports are so corrupt, and the cartels own the ports, that the chemicals come in with no problem. They go to their lab operations. They have industrial-sized labs, like for meth. They're producing ton quantities every couple of days because they have a steady supply of the precursors.
The addiction crisis isn't just China or the cartels' fault. They are the suppliers, but we're the buyers. When it came to opioid addiction in the United States, it began with our own pharmaceutical companies in the late 1990s. Those companies reassured doctors and nurses that patients wouldn't become addicted to pain relievers, and then they were prescribed at overwhelming rates. By the time 2017 rolled around and the federal government declared a public health emergency, it was too late. America's addiction was soaring, and our enemies saw this weakness and organized to exploit it. According to the Brookings Institution, more than 107,000 Americans died from overdoses in 2021, with more than 70% of those deaths caused by opioids. The truth is, a lot of these deaths are from poisonings, using counterfeit pills with China's fentanyl supply. China is finding the Mexican cartels to be an eager partner in moving opiates, meth, and precursor chemicals, which are the compounds necessary to make fentanyl, a weapon of mass destruction.
They're taking a pill that they think is a harmless pill, like Xanax, because they want to chill out for exams or something, and suddenly it's laced with fentanyl and they're dead.
Texas Congressman Chip Roy.
And that's happening. One pill, you're dead. And we've had a famous University of Texas football star. We had an NFL star recently. We've had numerous people in the district I represent where you end up having multiple deaths. You'll have somebody who took fentanyl, knowingly or unknowingly, but usually unknowingly because it's laced on something they thought was safe. They go into cardiac arrest, someone there tries to help them, and then they go into cardiac arrest from the transitive property of this very, very dangerous narcotic. The American people don't understand what's happening. This makes the cocaine epidemic of the 80s look trivial.
How is this happening, and why is our government powerless to stop it? The fentanyl being mixed together in the Mexican labs is 50 to 100 times more potent than morphine. Derek Maltz.
They have the chemists down there. They have all the operatives they need. They make the stuff. And then they blitz the border. They get their routes into California, into Arizona, and into Texas.
Cartels love making synthetic narcotics because they're easier and cheaper to produce. According to the New York Times, cartels no longer need huge fields or enormous amounts of labor to grow their drug ingredients. They can create a tremendous amount of fentanyl in small, virtually undetectable locations. This also allows for the creation of much more powerful drugs that can be smuggled into the U.S. in smaller amounts. Our government's response to this crisis is far too weak, and this passive reaction has people like Derek Maltz appalled.
Just a hypothetical, if Al-Qaeda had 1 pound of chemical weapons in Mexico, the entire U.S. government would be all over that and going after that and trying to keep it out of our country, right? But you're talking about already seized 4,900 pounds in the first 5 months of fentanyl. Fentanyl is killing. The DEA lab just did a recent study, and they analyzed these counterfeit pills, right? And they determined that 26% of them had a lethal dose. So if you look at DEA Phoenix alone, last year they reported 6 million counterfeit oxy pills were seized. That could have killed, with no exaggeration, like 1.5 million Americans, just based on the DEA lab statistics on lethal doses, right? Now, don't get me wrong, not every pill is going to kill, but one pill can kill, and that's the point.
Like Maltz says, we need to follow the money. China ships precursor chemicals to the Mexican cartels. The cartels make cheap and deadly pills with those ingredients and ship them to the United States. Once those drugs are here, They are exchanged for money at a huge profit. Moving that money around is becoming a lot easier in the age of global banking. Drug money from the U.S. can be moved to Chinese banks with just a few clicks on a smartphone app. Once this money is in those Chinese banks, U.S. law enforcement can't touch it. Simone Ledeen is a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense who is familiar with counterterrorism and illicit funding.
It is very clear that Chinese criminal groups, suppliers, and consumers play a significant role in Mexican drug trafficking, both in the supply of precursors and in the laundering of funds that are derived from drug trafficking. There are not too many steps between these criminal groups and the CCP. I think there's a very good argument that you could make that maybe the government itself has inserted a couple of layers between themselves and these criminal groups to make it look like they're not supported by the government. But anyone who has any understanding at all of the modern Chinese police state knows that they are tracking everything. They are aware of everything.
And the Chinese Communist Party is well aware of what's going on. James Carafano, who is the leading national security and foreign policy expert with the Heritage Foundation, says there is direct evidence that the CCP is involved in the financing, manufacturing, and exportation of illicit narcotics.
When we're looking at the numbers that we're looking at, it is impossible to move that kind of cash through a legal system. And at the end of the day, you want to be able to turn that usable cash that you can use in the West, not just in China. So, of course, anybody who thinks that Chinese entities are not involved in money laundering and that this isn't being done without the consent of the Chinese government, this is just nonsense.
Why is this money so hard to track down? Why are we allowing this to happen? Simone Ledeen says to clamp down on money laundering worldwide, we need to commit to stopping it here first.
Globally, money laundering is such a big problem because people benefit from all that money. The people who should be enforcing actions against this criminal activity are actually profiting off of it instead. And we see that around the world. What is the number one money laundering country in the world? It's the United States of America.
And despite that, our nation is in a constant internal struggle to target its adversaries. Unfortunately, because we aren't cleaning our own house, we may not be following the breadcrumbs that could end up exposing our enemies. Because China and the cartels aren't just after our money. They want our land too. For China, increasingly there are no borders. In 2021, a real estate purchasing group that included a retired general from the Chinese military bought 130,000 acres of land near Laughlin Air Force Base in Del Rio, Texas. They said it was for a windmill project, but that base just happens to be where many of our pilots are trained.
This company is connected to the Chinese Communist Party.
Texas Congressman Brian Babin.
It's my understanding that there is a retired Chinese general that is one of the big personages in this purchase. And when you look, 130,000 acres in Texas alone, you check and see, and there's nearly 5 million acres that is owned of agricultural land that is owned in Texas by foreigners. But this is our adversary. Our chief major adversary in the world today is China.
Another group with ties to the Chinese Communist Party purchased 300 acres of farmland in Grand Forks, North Dakota, about a 20-minute drive to the Air Force Base there. That's especially alarming because it is where a lot of top secret information regarding our military's drone programs is kept. But lands near our military installations are not the only places Chinese investors want to buy. Between April 2021 and May 2022, Chinese investors scooped up more than $6.1 billion worth of U.S. homes. And as interest rates surge, pricing many Americans out of the market, Chinese investors aren't sweating it. Why? Because they're paying all in cash and avoiding those rates. If that isn't enough, Texas Congressman Chip Roy says China is targeting our food supply.
They're buying up agriculture and farmland. They're buying up meat processing plants. And we're asleep at the switch. I've introduced legislation to ban anybody affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party from buying land. I'm going to continue to fight that message. I think it ought to be a central pillar to our national security message as Republicans to prevent that. We could ban that tomorrow. In fact, the Texas legislature should ban non-Texans from owning Texas dirt. Like, I think the Texas legislature ought to say no. I don't care even if you're from another part of the United States. We want Texans to own Texas land.
Businesses connected to the Chinese Communist Party are investing in education, technology, space, agriculture, and real estate throughout the globe. They are purchasing land in the United States with a strategy in mind. In Oklahoma, the beautiful terrain, the farmlands, I visited with Governor Stitt. I went on horseback, and I'm familiar with the area. We have friends there. But guess what? Underneath that land are natural resources so abundant. Oil and the farmland itself is a national security treasure. In Oklahoma, Chinese entities were buying up farmland and other resources and even influencing local politics. Governor Kevin Stitt gives us a simpler explanation for what's happening in his state.
China doesn't have the resources to even feed their own population, so they're looking to have agricultural land, different things, farming land all over, which we need to be very, very cautious of.
This isn't just about food being made in America and shipped overseas in large quantities. Some worry that diseases introduced both inadvertently and on purpose will decimate the American farming industry.
Think about how COVID shut down the world and where that originated from and where that virus was really created. And you think about, foreign animal disease outbreaks, African swine fever. When we have these outbreaks, we have a huge pork industry. We supply pork in Oklahoma around the country. We're the number 2 beef producer in the country here in Oklahoma. And if you can introduce some of those things, you could really hurt the domestic food supply.
Is China really making these land purchases for the reasons it says? Governor Stitt and Oklahoma lawmakers are busy working to block foreign interests from buying land. They say they must stop the CCP from taking advantage of loopholes in drug laws that lead to an increase in harmful illegal activities.
We've passed about 10 different laws this year. We've made it illegal to purchase land. If you're a Chinese foreign national is not allowed to own agricultural or farmland. But we're seeing them move in through straw buyers. So that's what we're trying to attack now. And really, we think it's kind of for profit. It's the medical marijuana industry that we passed, several years back. And so they're coming in and putting grow houses together, illegally selling marijuana, not through the state's dispensary network for medicine, but they're actually doing it illegally for recreational all over. So we put a stop to that. I stopped all new licenses to be approved. We put a moratorium on those for 2 years. We've done some huge drug busts. So we're trying to get control of it.
Oklahoma is a rare exception when it comes to confronting Chinese land grabs in the U.S. Washington Times national security correspondent and China expert Bill Gertz says the Chinese are benefiting as the American government and business community mostly waffle over how to respond. weighing short-term financial gains versus long-term security.
China is a revolutionary communist state which views the United States as its mortal enemy. And so everything that they do, whether it's economic or commercial, has a military or a strategic component to it. And so that's why they're buying up land. Again, the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States was supposed to have been strengthened to try and take a look at these issues and whether they should be buying land or other places or businesses in the United States. Again, there's still a debate going on. There's a strong section of the government and the business community that wants to ignore China's genocide in Western China or the repression in Hong Kong and just do business with China. But the other hand, there are people who say this is an existential threat. We've got to take action now.
We are selling out our nation from under our noses to our detriment. Houses are more expensive than ever. Our farmland is increasingly controlled by foreign interests, and we're putting our national security at risk. China's increasing its influence around the world, but it is especially positioning itself to be on America's doorstep. But what if I told you that China and its cartel buddies aren't just knocking on the door? They're already here in ways you haven't even thought of.
This problem is manifesting in the form of illegal grows, natural resources being stolen, citizens being threatened. But we've also found, 10 dead bodies of these illegal immigrants who are indentured servants working there.
In our next episode, we'll explore how the cartels are operating inside the United States. I'm Sara Carter. I hope you'll join me then.